Greetings and salutations, and welcome to Radio Dayz, a podcast radio program that delves into the world of terrestrial radio. It's DJs and on-air personality, and you, all fans of radio as a medium. Here's your host, Ron.
Hello and welcome to Radio Dayz the Podcast. You can hear this podcast on BuzzSprout, as well as all the major podcast platforms like Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts. You can also watch this podcast via YouTube, as well as my website, ronrobinsonstudios.com. In this episode, which is brought to you by Team 71 Mortgage Group and Radio Dayz the Movie, we're going to be taking a dive into the career of a Detroit sports talk radio legend. I don't throw that name around, but he is, in fact, a Detroit sports radio legend. He's been heard on WDET as well as WDFN in Detroit. He's also worked as a producer for Fox 2 News. And for the last 6 years, he's worked for the Detroit Red Wings. I think it's been the last 6 years. Did I mention he's a graduate of the University of Michigan? He is a true Wolverine. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only Mr. Red Wings himself, Art Regner. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Ron. How are you? About time that we finally got this together. It seems like forever we've been planning it. So
yes, I think
I'm looking forward to it.
Good. And I'm excited because a lot of people know you from one aspect of broadcasting to another, and now you work behind the scenes for the Red Wings. But before we get into your career in broadcasting, Art, I asked this of a lot of my first guests. What were you listening to on the radio when you were growing up?
I listened to a lot of WKNR, Keener 13, CKLW, obviously Tiger Baseball on the air, really almost all the play-by-play of all the Detroit sports teams, and obviously Michigan. I always tried to listen to Bob Ufer if possible, although I did like Tom Hemingway on WUOM, and so I was really... that was pretty much it, I mean, I really liked music as well, and I tried to, listen to a variety of different things, truly. But, the Keener guides and all that kind of stuff. I mean, we're going back a number of years. I was, I couldn't drive
Keener
or anything
13,
like that. I was really a kid.
Yeah, Keener 13.
I was really a kid.
You mentioned Bob Ufer. My very first job in radio was interning for Joe Gannon, the appliance doctor. And I was there when they went from the 22nd floor to the 8th floor. And so I remember going in on a Saturday, and everybody had pillaged the whole floor. I mean, there wasn't much left. Mm-hmm. One of the two things that I got was a cart of a clip of J.P. McCarthy doing the parade, the Thanksgiving Day parade. But my most prized possession, even to this day, was a 2-set disc of the best of Bob Ufer. Talk to me about why Bob Ufer made such an impact on you, because I know he's such a huge influence on you.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's really interesting. I guess why I brought him up, but Bob Ufer, and plus the appliance doctor, Joe Gannon, I work with him, good friend of mine. I have nothing. I love Joe as well. Good hockey guy too. But I think what I liked about Bob Ufer was that he was an unabashed homer. We know that. But I think, sports was still kind of fun. Even Dr. Strange Hayes for Woody Hayes, he used a lot of cultural references. He himself was a world-class athlete at the University of Michigan. I think he had a track record for like 1,400 meters or something when he was a student at U of M. Very successful, I think, in real estate in Ann Arbor. But I think he kind of brought fun to it. I mean, he was serious, those dastardly Buckeyes, tear down the banner, real famous thing when the Go Blue banner, they'll pay a price for that. But I think he waxed poetic in a way that was non-threatening. I think today when you look at rivalries, like I hate the Michigan State rivalry these days. It's way too over the top on both sides. I mean, I just don't pay attention to that stuff anymore. And I really don't pay attention to sports fans in general anymore because it's ugly. And Bob Ufer was anything but ugly. He made it fun. And, hey, I'm a Michigan homer too, so it was fun that way as well. But I really think even if you were a fan of the opposing team and you heard his broadcast, I think you were chuckling right along with him. I don't know if that's the case today with the way sports has, I'm going to sound like I'm a big Devo fan, the de-evolution of sports fans as far as not the evolution of sports fans.
We're going to talk a little bit about the Detroit Lions later, but, Dan Miller, I think, is really putting that fandom back into broadcasting from a play-by-play perspective we haven't had in a while. Anyway, we'll come back to that. Go ahead.
Well, yeah. Dapper Dan obviously has a passion and an enthusiasm. He definitely gives a complete and honest sports report. You can tell he likes it. Look at his Sunday night show. His round table. Those guys. Sometimes it's a little too inside. They're all really, really good friends, and I think he should. And I'm not advocating I should be on it, but I think the panel could be freshened up once in a while. But aside from that, I think they do a wonderful job. I really do. But you can tell he's really into it. He has a passion for it. He is a reporter too. He's objective. He handles the 5 W's and an H: who, what, when, where, why, and how. Inverted pyramid style. I mean, he gets it. He's a journalist. He's really a sports journalist.
And I think that's a great segue because even before you got into radio broadcasting or television broadcasting, for that matter, you started out your career in journalism. When and how did you know you wanted to pursue a career in journalism?
I think really what it really comes down to is two things. When I was a boy for Christmas, and I was probably in junior high school, and I'm sitting actually in my bedroom as a kid, the bedroom I had as a child, and my parents gave me a small miniature reel-to-reel tape recorder for Christmas.
Cool.
And for some reason, back here on this door that has the Red Wing jersey and various shirts that I wear, the door was closed, and I had a bunch of pennants from different NFL teams. There was a string of them. And under each pennant, I had written the starting quarterback, like Baltimore Colts, Johnny Unitas, Green Bay Packers, was Bart Starr, Roger Staubach, or whomever was the quarterback of Dallas. And so I was always kind of into it, and I created a character called Don Degushki, whom I'm not sure why I came up with that name, and I would interview my friends who were Bart Starr or Greg Landry or whomever, who were basically football players, because I grew up on a street where Sam Williams, one of the original Fearsome Foursome, and I knew his son. I still know his son Skip very, very well, who's like Sam as well. But he just lived down the street. So the Detroit Lions were always real to me. I mean, I could see them. They were tangible people. I would go to Livonia Franklin High School and work out with Mr. Williams, who would meet Wayne Walker there. And Wayne Walker also lived in Livonia, and he was starting to, he got onto Channel 2, I think, as a sportscaster, moved to San Francisco. But I can remember being at Franklin High School as Mr. Williams and Wayne Walker would run around and do all that stuff. And we're in our Lions uniforms and stuff, and we're running around too. And then I can remember it would always end with Wayne Walker kicking field goals on Franklin's football field and us underneath the goalposts catching them. So, I mean, I had a real into sports. My father was a huge Michigan fan. I liked communication. Mrs. Summers, one of the neighbor ladies, whenever they would go on vacation, she would come back and she'd always say, "Arthur, what's going on in the neighborhood? You have your ear to the ground. What's going on? What happened when we were on vacation?" And she said, "You should start a newspaper," and all this kind of stuff. So I think I was always geared that way. Like most kids, I wanted to be an athlete. I just wasn't, as good as I hoped to be. I wanted to play sports for the University of Michigan and then play goal for the Montreal Canadiens or the Red Wings. That was my sport, or be a professional tennis player.
Tennis,
and travel the world.
Okay.
Those were the two things that I really, really wanted to do. But my point being is that my parents grew up on radio. I think I'm the first or second generation around that grew up with television.
Right.
My whole life. I can remember. My parents did not obviously grow up that way. They had this record set, and I might even have it in this room someplace. It was 6 or 7 records, albums, vinyl,
right.
That was Jack Benny's Golden Days of Radio.
Nice.
And my parents would have parties, and they would play this, and all their friends would remember this stuff. And I really got into it, like Fibber McGee and Molly and The Shadow and, all Texaco, Mystery Hour or whatever, all this kind of stuff. And then I would play it on my own. So I really think when it became time for me to actually be something, I think I always wanted to be on the radio, be a radio personality. And I really wanted to be a music jock, and I started off that way and really enjoyed it and was, fairly successful. But then with, the way the business has changed, music radio to me is an abomination now. Yeah. And so, I changed. I knew if I wanted to make money in it, the only way I could be a personality was to go into talk radio, and that's why I made the move to sports.
Well, before we move on to your broadcasting career, I do have to ask you, because he is such a legend now, but, like you, I grew up idolizing this man, Bo Schembechler. What was it like to cover Bo?
Well, the first time I covered Bo Schembechler at Old Michigan Stadium, where the press box was like in the front, they don't have these 2 huge buildings on each side of it now and the scoreboards. I mean, it was a small little press box, and it had various floors, and they used to have like a media day for everybody, and I was a freshman and I wanted to go, and so I did, and it was a big luncheon and all this kind of stuff. And I remember I was going to use the restroom, and Bo walks out. He would address the media. This was a luncheon. Everybody sits to the media. We all kind of eat. Everyone's in a good mood. They get free food and all that kind of stuff. And then Bo would address about the team, and you could ask him questions. Your typical kind of luncheon presser kind of thing. And so, but I was new to this. I was 17 years old. I'm a freshman at the University of Michigan. And so either he was walking in and I was walking out, or it could have been the other way around. It was a while ago. And he looked at me, and he could tell that, I'm fresh-faced, sure, hair down to here. I'm I'm the freaky, that was the style back then, wearing painter's pants probably, and, a decent shirt, I hope. And he said, "Well, son," he goes, how are you enjoying everything? How was the food?
Wow. That's cool.
And I'm like, I swear to God, because I'm high strung, and I was shaking because I had gone to Michigan games my whole life. I was there at, Woody tearing up the sideline marker, all that stuff. My dad, that was the only thing he ever, sprung for. Season tickets was Michigan football. And I was like, seriously, if I strung 2 words that were coherent together, I was doing well. And he looked at me and he said, "Well, I guess it must have been good," and proceeded, out, So that was my first time. But then over the years, obviously, I got to know him really, really well. And, he would always say to me, which I guess to me made me feel good, but he'd say, "Regner," and he always called me Regner. He never called me Art or Arthur or anything. He goes, "Regner, I don't think you know a lick about football, but you love Michigan." That's what he would always say to me. And I say, you know what? He's probably right. I don't get caught up in the X's and O's of anything, I'm pretty adept at what's going on in hockey because I've covered it for so long, and not that kind of stuff. But I'm not sitting there after a Lions game recording it and then breaking it down play by play or anything. I don't care that much. And so, and I'm not saying everybody who does it. People are different. More power to you. If that's the way you like to do your thing, go ahead. Like I said, I respect that. So I think it was just great covering it for him. I remember him being mad when they lost to Miami and Jimmy Johnson got a call overturned, and he came in and he was just on a tirade about how a visiting coach could work the officials like that at Michigan Stadium. And, I saw, highs and lows of him, but I really, when he resigned as Michigan's coach, then I saw him at the Tigers. I've always felt that he got a really bum rap about the whole Ernie Harwell thing, which I won't get into, but, I thought he was great. Now, the one thing that Bo and I did not do is that we did not talk politics, because he would, he'd like, you're such a Ann Arbor kid that way. You're such a Michigan guy, and all that kind of stuff. Because, Michigan, I don't know where they're at now, but they were definitely pretty liberal back then. And so, but that was about it. I mean, a wonderful man. I mean, I've been blessed, Ron. I mean, if I really, really look at it, the guys that I was able to cover, Bo, even Nick Saban. I always liked Nick Saban. He'd always come in there at Michigan State, stand up there, and first he'd oversee everybody, kind of look around and go, "How y'all doing?" That's how he. It's like, okay, and I thought he was a great, tremendous coach. I really did, even back then. It's easy for me to say that now, but even Nick Saban. Red Berenson at Michigan, just an iconic legend. But I could just say, from Sparky Anderson to to Scotty Bowman, who I believe is the greatest coach in all of sport history. And I'm a big John Wooden fan too. Chuck Daly, good friend of mine, love Chuck Daly. So I've had some real cream of the crop people that I was able to cover and get to know. And that's one of the things that I really cherish is when you're privileged to do what I do, and I've always said it beats working for a living. You do build up personal relationships with them, yet you have to stay true to your profession. And if you have to criticize and say something wrong or ask a tough question, you have to do it. You just have to do it. And, if you sit there and criticize, there was a point where my Lions rants were so big and I was, would go off the hook that the next day, and I had a relationship with Mark Carrier. We did Channel 50 together. Sunday nights all the time. And, Carrier would always say, "Oh, you're going to come in and say that?" And I knew that if I was going to criticize someone or, especially the Lions, because I was really pretty intense about them, I knew that I had to go in the room. I knew I had to face those guys.
We're going to talk a little bit about that. I don't want to jump ahead because you obviously got your prominence from the Fan. But am I mistaken? Before you worked at the Fan, didn't you work as a producer for Fox 2 News? Is that true?
Well, right. What happened was it wasn't Fox 2 at the time. It was WJBK. It was a CBS affiliate. Yes. In order to get to Detroit, my first job was a producer at WXYT 1270 Talk. I was first a producer for John McCullough, good guy, and then Denny McClain, which was a trip because I grew up. The 68 Tigers were like my team. I was in sixth grade when they won the World Series. And so I started there. Then I moved over to television. I went with a friend of mine. She got a job there as an executive producer of a show. She wanted to hire me, so I left and I got into TV, where I was also a sports producer, worked for Eli Zaret. He was the main sports guy, but Verge Jocks, Fred Heumann, Mark Wilson, Willie Boy, my good bud. And, so I started doing that, and I was the producer of the Eli and Denny show. I can honestly say, and I have said this publicly before, working for Eli Zaret was the worst experience of my life, which was really weird because I hated working for him, but I like him as a person. But we just did not mesh. We just did not mesh. And so Eli knows that. I've told him, many times, trust me. And I've stated that on the air numerous times. I think anybody who knows me knows that Channel 2 was the worst experience of my life. I got out of that and after a professional life. Yeah. But, from there, and then, I think DFN...
Yeah, in '94, DFN started. Go ahead, tell me about the
started right around then. Yeah, then DFN started, and I interviewed with Lorna Gladstone.
Yeah, because you were like you were like one of the first people hired.
I was the first person hired by WDFN. She had already, or Detroit person. She had Rich Pimenko, who was from Chicago. That's where Lorna was from. She knew Pimenko. And so she told me that she was going to hire a sports director, but she wanted me to become the executive producer of the radio station, which I became. Soon after that, she told me she was really into Greg Henson and would like to hire him also as an associate executive producer or something. And she said, but you've got to interview him first. And I liked Greg from day one. And Greg and I are still friends, and another guy I won't talk politics with. But, but aside from that, I really took to Greg, and then we hired virtually everybody else. And the guy that I'm probably most pleased about when I look back on DFN, who I hired, who I really think why we were able to maintain and become a radio station, and we had very talented people. I'm not going to take anything away, and I could sit here and give you the litany of our lineup, which was really impressive.
Strong.
But was Don Swindell. Don Swindell, who was the imaging director, did all our voices, wrote most of our parody songs. I mean, we all chipped in. I think Don Swindell, who was kind of the imaging of the station, was a former musician and also an old radio dog. I think that Don Swindell's talent, which was varied in so many different areas, really allowed us as young radio talent, and maybe not established in Detroit, to calm ourselves down and grow. I really think, and you know what? And Don Swindell was my hire. I was in charge of the production director, and
good hire.
I could see that we weren't going to be a conventional radio station, nor did we have conventional equipment. And I knew most production directors think they're God's gift to production, and usually they are. They're very talented people. I knew one of those type of production directors would never last with the facility that we had. But I knew that Don, who was a crazy, saxophone player, I knew that Don would be able to handle it, and he did. So,
he was. I had him on this podcast. I think the second or third episode of season 3. If you don't know Don Swindell, I can assure you that you know his voice. He wrote the Stoney and Wojo song. He was the Claude Lemieux character in all those Red Wing parodies. Very talented. And you're right. Not a lot of people would have fit in with the misfits that you guys turned out to start with, right?
Well, right. That's exactly right. We all had varied backgrounds. I really think the ones who were really strong in radio were me, Greg, Jennifer Hammond, who I always just called Jennifer still, Jamie Samuelson, who was really pretty fresh out of Northwestern and working in Chicago, and then everybody had me, and Stoney was doing the Mitch Albom show as his producer and his co-host, but he was more in television, a producer for Bernie at Channel 4, but it was a good mix. Rob Parker was obviously a journalist. We got a lot of print people. The real interesting thing I will tell you about that, when we started DFN, even though I was a trained journalist and media person, and had been doing it for years either in Ann Arbor or Howell. I was sports director. I mean, I consider myself a reporter. I'm a good reporter, and so, but we had no credibility with any of the journalists there. We were the new kids on the block, and we weren't really treated very well. Yet, I do think that our talent and the way we were willing to learn, and radio is personality driven, that we were able to gain a foothold rather quickly. And a lot of that was because of Greg and I understood the various elements of personality and entertainment radio. Yeah. So I would always apply journalistic principles, but I knew that, I knew that I could hate the Lions, love the Red Wings, love the Tigers, pleasantly surprised by anything the Pistons do, and love Michigan. I could take on different roles and do that. If I were a hardcore beat reporter or journalist, I could not do that. I would have to be, as Pat Caputo always says, the king of objectivity. So I would have to be that.
Well, in addition to you being, people call you a Red Wing fan and whatever the case may be, you were just as notorious, you and Greg, for just being so damn critical of the Detroit Lions, and not that they didn't deserve it, but. And you mentioned early on that you felt, even though you were complaining about the play of these guys, you felt you needed to be in the room. What was it like to be in the room with these Lions, who you're going in and just lambasting? Because you didn't mince words. You weren't politically correct. You told it how you felt it.
Oh yeah, well there's a couple of things. First of all, the Red Wings would play a lot of Sunday games at like 6 o'clock back then or something, or maybe 7, but they had Sunday early evening games. It wasn't the regular face-off time. And I can remember, and they were good, so I can remember I would be on the air after Lions games and then go immediately to the Red Wing game. DFN was just down Jefferson, and, it was like a 5-minute drive. And so I would go there, and I can't tell you how many times the Red Wing players themselves would say driving into the game, they were listening to my Lions meltdowns and cracking up, and some of them making comparisons between Wayne Fontes and Jacques Demers, their coach, or I don't know if he was coach at the time. He probably wasn't, but, like they had some similar traits, but if I heard it once, I heard it a lot from Lion players that when they were home, and they had lost a game or even won, but usually lost, and let's be frank, they lost virtually all the time. So they couldn't wait to run out to their cars and listen to me, and they weren't sure if they wanted to beat the crap out of me or just were laughing so hard because I was so emotionally attached to, I would say, I can remember one I got a lot of people that still quote me, which is very, very odd. But one time I said, tomorrow when he pulls up in his Porsche, Wayne Fontes should be met by 2 guards, escorted to his desk, clean it out, and then send him on his way. I'm kind of,
No,
it was a little more graphic than that.
Well,
but
this is a nice segue into something that I want you to share, if you would, because another great talent that came from WDFN is the late, great Jamie Samuelson. And when I sat down and interviewed you for my documentary, yes, Art Regner is in my documentary along with Greg Henson, Terry Foster. Can you share the story of your Wayne Fontes story with Jamie Samuelson? You know what I'm talking about. This is why.
Oh yeah, I definitely know. Dunleavy's was a pub that was within walking distance to WDFN, and every Friday night, and Sean Dunleavy, was a good friend of ours, and Jack, his father, who ran it, and we knew virtually everybody. It was like our hangout, along with Andrews, which was down the street, run by our good buddy Tommy as well. But Friday nights was Dunleavy's, and I don't know if I was covering a game or I was doing something. And so I got there a little bit late, and we had our spot and all that kind of stuff. And Dunleavy's, if you walked in, the bar was right there, and it was long, and they had some tables. And then they had a dining room area, too. And, people were eating. It was a nice, they had good food and all that kind of stuff. And we never sat at the bar. We always had our own, corner and table, and that's where the DFN people were. So I walk in one night, and it's Friday, so it's really, really crowded. And Jamie is standing, right at the door, in the door. And I'm looking at it, and he goes, hey, Art, how are you? I go, good, Jamie. But I could tell, you got this vibe. He's waiting for me. And, he says, hey. He goes, did you see it yet? Have you seen it yet? I said, what? And he goes over, and he looks, and at the end of the bar is Wayne Fontes sitting there with, I believe, Greg Montgomery, the punter for the Lions at the time, former Michigan Stater, and they're getting hammered. They're just doing shot after shot after shot, And again, Jamie knows at that time, I had formed Grow, Get Rid of Wayne. I was not a big Wayne Fontes fan. And, but, he was a personality, He played the Ford family, right? Or at least Mr. Ford.
Yeah.
Where's my owner? Where's my owner? So anyway, I looked over and I was incredulous, and here he is, boom, 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 boom. I don't know if they had a game on Sunday or what, but, but Wayne is just sitting there, like I said, getting hammered. There could have been a couple of other Lion players for all I know. And Jamie's looking at me, And I pointed over there and I said to him, I go, this is why we lose. That's exactly what I told him. And he started cracking up.
That's
Ron,
so funny.
from that day on, over the years, whenever I would be with Jamie at an event or I would run into him and he would, you know, if we parted, I was sitting here and he was sitting over there. Sometime during this period when we were together, he would look over at me and he would mouth. And then start laughing. And I would start laughing too. It was kind of like our little thing.
Sure.
And I am talking, this went on from that point through, unfortunately,
Passing,
obviously
yeah.
when he got ill. I mean, but every time I saw Jamie, he would always say that to me. But he wouldn't say it to me.
He would mouth it.
Would catch my eye or we would catch each other. And then he would just look at me, smile, and whisper, this is why we lose. So, I mean, I miss Jamie. He was a great guy, great pipes. I never thought when we hired him. And I remember offering him the job. And I thought that, first of all, I didn't think he would take it because it was in Chicago. Secondly, I thought he would, if he did take it, he would only be here a couple of years.
Right.
But he fell in love with Detroit. He met Christy, fell in love. They had children. He really became a Detroiter, and we're better for it. But Jamie.
We lost a good one for sure.
Yeah, definitely,
Too soon.
without question.
So before we move on from the Lions, this is something else you and I have in common. Art is we both walked away from. We were once diehard Lions fans. And then for me, when Barry left, I have to tell you, I stopped watching. Like, I started watching to make, like, from the time Barry retired to this last season, like, I didn't watch any games. Like, I saw bits and pieces of Calvin Johnson here and there. But last season, the first, 5 or 6 games, I would see all my friends on Facebook going to and giving the Lions all their money. And I was just like, so I started watching Lions games almost to make fun of them. Like, what are you doing? And the first game I started watching, and when I say it watching, I would watch the entire game, was the first game they won after starting 1-6. And then I would watch, and then they won another time, and then they won again. And I have to tell you, by the end of the season, with the help of Dan Miller's enthusiasm, I am not only drinking the Lions Kool-Aid again, Art, I am guzzling it like I haven't had a drink in a long time. Have you gone back? I've seen you post Michigan Panther stuff, but have you gone back and looked at the Lions this past season? And what's your forecast on that?
Don't get me started on the Panthers. I mean, I love, I'm going back to Bobby Hebert, John Corker, David Greenwood, and of course Anthony Carter. I mean, I love that team. And I will say this, without question, regardless of sport, their home and road uniform is one of the best of all time.
Love it.
There's no question. I mean, it is outstanding. Now, getting back to the Lions, I became Lion free one day. It was early in the season. I was driving down to Ford Field to go to the Lions game, and I had an epiphany. And I was driving, and I was getting on to 96 off of Middle Belt, and I was talking to myself. I wasn't talking out loud, just in my head. And I said, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this to yourself? Why do you allow this pathetic team to rule your life? Do you care? Why are you going? And then I swear to God, it was a nice sunny day. It was early September. And it was like beam of light came down from me in a choir of angels. And I don't know if it was God himself or I guess Jesus, if you believe they're not the same person. I don't know. I don't want to get into religion, but there was a voice, a distinct voice that said, you don't have to go. And I said, you're right. And I turned around and I drove home and I've never been back. And Joey Harrington was the quarterback. So it goes to show you how long ago that was. I have been Lions free. I am not emotionally attached to that team. I don't wish them any ill will. I like Bill Ford Jr. a lot. I don't know Sheila Hemp, is it? She dropped the Ford now. I don't know her. She seems to be doing a good job. Dan Campbell reminds me of the dude from The Big Lebowski.
I'm the dude.
The dude. I mean, I just think the way he looks. I just wish that somebody, and I've told you this before, Ron, would make a T-shirt of Dan Campbell in a bathrobe with a headset on, with a clipboard in one hand, and a White Russian in the other, you know, and you know, the Dan abides or something. I mean, I think people would sell it. He reminds me of the dude. That's awesome. I mean, his personality. I think I do think he's a motivator. I think he's an excellent coach, and you know, and maybe the Lions have it right for a change. Maybe they do, but I became Lions free, and you know, I really appreciate what they're doing. You know, this is what I've always said too, Ron, about the Lions. If they make it to the Super Bowl, and I used to do this bit on the radio. We know eventually the Lions will make it to the Super Bowl. I may not be alive, but eventually they're going to make it. We all know they're going to lose that game. They're not going to win it. They will not win. But in typical Lion fashion, how will they lose the Super Bowl? Yeah. What will happen that the Lions, how are they going to lose it? Now, I will tell you another time when I got emotional about the Lions and was pissed, was the playoff game in Dallas where they picked up a flag and reversed the call. The Lions would have won that game. And just like Barry, though, I blame the Lions for being such an inept organization for so long. They have no credibility or respect throughout the league. Sure. You know, the HBO show, Hard Knocks.
Yeah, Hard Knocks.
Did more to elevate the Lions and give them credibility than anything this organization has ever done. And they've had iconic players. Calvin Johnson, obviously Barry, perhaps the best running back of all time. I'm just saying that for me, I say this now. If the Lions get to the Super Bowl, even though I don't expect them to win it, not only will I be on the bandwagon, I will be driving the freaking thing. You know, I mean, I do want it, but I have been able to
cut the cord, so to speak. Yeah.
Emotionally divorce myself from the Detroit Lions. I am truly Lions free, and I think people say, well, you'll comment or you'll post on them. Yeah, but I'm not. You know, when the Lions lose now, or even when I don't care.
Right.
You know, and I can honestly say, if I have something else to do, or I don't watch them. You know, I just don't. I like pro football. How it comes to me now when I watch pro football, the way I pick a team to root for is when I scan the game, either how many players are from Detroit on each roster or how many players played for Michigan. You know, and so, you know, obviously, wherever Tom Brady was playing, I was a big fan. But I'm saying that, you know, that's what it's pro football's been reduced for me, Ron. It really has, and I have nobody to thank but the Lions. You know, right. I mean, you can talk about Barry, but I can go back to Ron Jesse. Doug English quit a year as an All-Pro because he could make more money. They've always had a tough time treating their players well. I can remember. I forgot who, Jeff Harding's, the year he was drafted, I think it was Chuck Schmidt, who, they had two number one picks. I'm not sure who the other, I'm going to say Reggie Rogers, but I don't know if that was the case. But they had two guys, and they signed one early, and basically gave him all the rookie money, or something. And Chuck Schmidt was like, you know, so Harding sat forever. You know, and eventually left Detroit to be in Pittsburgh, became an All-Pro. You know, Jeff Harding's great lineman. So I'm sitting there, and I remember Schmidt's quote was, well, I got the best of that agent. You know, he screwed his client because he didn't negotiate, and I signed, you know, so-and-so, whoever the other player was. And I'm sitting to myself thinking, really? Is that who you screwed here? You're bragging about screwing a player that you're going to want to play for you and, you know, be loyal to the organization? Or did you screw me, the fans, because here's a great player that you said, well, I'm going to, you know, for lack of a better term, and excuse me, I'm going to dick with this guy. You know, I'm a bean counter. I know that his agent messed up. The numbers aren't going to be there what he wants. He's going to eventually have to settle for what I'm going to offer him, you know, and I feel great about that. That's not a way to run a team. I'm sorry. That's just, especially to treat high-end draft choices.
Right.
I think you want to build a relationship with those guys and want them to be Lions and want to be part of a winning organization. The Lions never seem to be able to do that for a variety of different reasons. And maybe now they're about to. I hope they are.
Optimistic, yeah.
Yeah, but I wish the dude, wish Dan the dude the best.
Well, that's just your opinion, man. Isn't that what he says in the movie?
Yeah, right. Hey,
so,
man, it's like, man, I can't believe we lost, man.
So in addition to being the guy who rants about the Lions, you also had another identity with as one half of the sports doctors. Talk about your on-air partnership and your partnership with Terry Foster.
Well, I was best man at Terry's wedding. I'm godfather to his daughter, Arthurina, as I still call her, but Celine. And, Terry and I have a very unique relationship because I knew him, through the circles that we ran in, because we ran in the same circles. But I really didn't get to know him until Lorna Gladstone said that she wanted to do a show. She wanted me and, specifically Terry to do it. They wanted an outlet for Terry because he was talented, but he was raw. And so they said, Art, would you kind of do that? And I met Terry. I don't think the movie theater is there anymore, but it was in Southfield. We sat down. I talked to him, and we came up with the sports doctors. He wanted to do the sports doctors, and so I was Dr. Regner, he was Dr. Foster. I bought lab coats. I still have it, the white lab coat. He has it. And we wrote the sports doctors open. Swindell voiced it, the siren and all that kind of stuff. And immediately our first guest was Scotty Bowman.
Wow.
We were originally on from 6 to 10 at night. They wanted to, I guess this must have been right after the demise of the Mega Man, Ike Griffin. And I hope Ike's doing real well. I think fans know he suffered a pretty nasty stroke there, but he's well on the road to recovery. Ike, a very interesting character too. But Terry and I and Scotty came on, and we just had a very much and I think because we're the same age and we grew up in Detroit. He grew up in Detroit. I grew up for the most part in Livonia, but there's always that thing. Are you a product of your environment or are you a product of your genes? And I think obviously you're a product of both, health-wise and the way you look, it's not your environment really. But I do think that Terry and I, our reference points were the same. We knew the history of the team. We could relate to each other very, very quickly, even though we didn't know each other well. We knew each other real well after doing the first couple of shows together because we grew up in the same environment.
Sure. Well, Terry's a quality person.
We were both, and I really think, and I don't mind saying it, I think our show was just as good as any show that was on.
I do too. It was must listen to for me. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah.
It was must listen to.
We always had fun. When I got into the Powerpuff Girls really big time, I just, and that was because, I nicknamed the lion helmet, this lion on the side of the helmet, Bubbles.
Yes.
Because it didn't look menacing, and it looked like it was chasing, popping bubbles in the air, leaping for bubbles. Like
to this day, people still think Bubbles is their mascot because of...
Right, I know. Mark Spindler thought that was really the name of the Lions, the Bubbles. Everybody called Bubbles. Boudini, Drew Sharp, everybody referred to him back then as Bubbles. That was because I called him Bubbles. Well, when the Powerpuff Girls came out, they have a character, Bubbles. And her color is Honolulu blue. And, Blossom and Buttercup, like Buttercup is red, Blossom was green, and Bubbles, the blonde-haired Powerpuff Girl, I can't believe I'm talking about this, but she was her color was blue. It was like the lion's blue. And I thought that was really appropriate. And I would go on tangents, and Terry just thought I was crazy. And then people started, and I still have some of this, started sending me, because, they're little girls, they're the Powerpuff Girls, they're really tiny, and they would fly like this. Well, people started sending me mock-ups of the lion's helmet. Instead of having Bubbles the lion on it, they would have Bubbles the Powerpuff Girl.
Wow.
And it was perfect. It was just perfect, you know? And so I think that's why Terry and I got along, because I would take it to ridiculous degrees.
Yeah.
You know, I really did, you know? And I think as you get older, I mean, like when I was small, if Michigan lost a game, I wouldn't talk for weeks, you know?
Right.
Or,
Crushing,
you know,
yeah.
I would get way too upset or way too into it. I think as you get older, and especially if you cover athletes, and the thing that's refreshing, they don't like to lose. They don't. Most of the time they understand why they lost, but they always have another game to play. You know, there's always a point that they can redeem themselves. We as fans just sit there and let it fester and linger long, you know, like Spartan Bob, you know. I mean, that game, I replayed that play over and over and over. You know, back then VCR was, I taped it, and you know, to a point of like people were worried about me, and you know, and then TJ Barrett, you know, never made that first down in that, so there's still moments where I'll get upset, but overall, I have a much better understanding of athletics and athletes, and I have nothing but respect for those guys. I mean, I know they make, money and they play a kid's game, but they're one hit or one play away from injury or their career being over. And Satchel Paige, buddy, you better be looking over your shoulder because there's somebody coming after you.
You also made a big splash while you were at WDFN, the Fan, for your coverage of the. Look, you guys had Stoney and Wojo, you had Greg and Jamie, and then you had the sports doctors. Not to mention, the Parker and the Man show later on. But you specifically made a huge splash for your coverage of the Red Wings, their Stanley Cup run. I believe that the Red Wings had a lot to do with that station's early success because they were so good. Talk about your relationship with the Red Wings and how that impacted that station.
I don't know, and I guess I should spit in a tube or do, Ancestry.com or Me in 23, whatever it's called, because I think I must have some sort of Canadian blood in me. I always loved hockey, but my mother loved hockey. She really loved hockey, and my Uncle Jack, as a matter of fact, I think in the foreword to What It Means to Be a Red Wing, or now called Red Wing Nation, the book that Kevin Allen and I wrote, I talk about it. My real first memories of watching hockey, I don't know if it was on Channel 9, but it was black and white, and they would join Red Wing games like in the second period.
Yeah, I remember
and my
that.
mom and my uncle Jack, my dad's brother, would watch these games, and I started to fall in love with hockey. And one time, my one cousin Agnes, or Ag, was in the hospital, and she shared a room with Ron Harris's wife, who was a Red Wing defenseman, I'm pretty sure, Ronnie Harris. And I can remember that I said, well, my cousin, he's such a huge sports fan, but he loves the Red Wings. And Ron Harris gave me an autographed picture of himself. And that was the first autograph I had ever gotten, even though, Mr. Williams lived down the street. It was part of the original Fearsome Foursome, and Mike Lucci and Paul Newmoff and Wayne Walker. I was never a big autograph person to begin with, ever. And so when he gave that to me, I just, I was so overwhelmed and appreciative that an athlete would take the time out and sign this for me. And you can say, Ron Harris, geez, but he was a good player, and I think that's where it really started. I really, really loved the Red Wings, loved hockey, obviously having Gordie Howe. I always tell people, before there was hockey, there was Gordie Howe. If you're from Detroit, you know what I mean, there was just something about the pace of the game, the players that play it, something about the winged wheel, the colors red and white. I have to admit, red's my favorite color, even though you would think blue would be, or maize.
Sure.
But I just was able to, from the moment I've walked into a locker room, I'm pretty comfortable to begin with, but there was just something that put me at ease there. They're very easy to talk to. I love the game. I've known Steve a long time. They allowed me to, to bust their chops as they're busting mine. And, but I feel really blessed with the Red Wings. I think because when the winger was around and when the Ilitches bought the team, I used to go and sit in the upper bowl, which was pretty much empty, with like little youth teams that they probably, because they sponsored so many, they probably gave free tickets just to get people in the building. And I can remember, Ron, they had these buckets of beer, I called them. They were like $6 and they were gigantic. And I could drink at 18 in Michigan, you know? And so I would carry these things. It was almost two-fisted, you know, you're kind of doing like that, you know, from some medieval movie, you know, a goblet. But they were huge. And I would sit there, and the winger would come out and he would play Red Wings, My Red Wings, that song. That's where that song originated, it when the winger let him out. Red Wings, you know, and I would be singing. And the more I drank, and I did not drive, you know, my friends, I would sit there and it would be Red Wings, My Red Wings, you know, power driving, you know, and I would get these little minor league hockey teams or junior teams or whatever they were, pee-wee teams, they were kids, you know, I wasn't that much older than most of them, and I would sing, and I would get them to sing Red Wing, My Red Wings, because when they score a goal, it would come on, and I'd say, you know, the end of the line is, come on, Wings, let's fly. That's how it ends. And I would always say, come on, Wings, don't die, because they were, of course, the dead wings or dead things. There's variations of it, but yeah, I would do that.
The Brad Park days, I call them.
Oh yeah, you know, and, you know, poor Ted Lindsay, you know, great guy. Aggressive Hockey is back in town. Alex Delvecchio. I mean, they went through a litany of people. You know, they really did. I mean, to me, the modern day architect of Red Wing hockey begins and ends with Jimmy Devellano. That was Mike Ilitch's, or the Ilitch family, Mrs. I and Mr. I. That was their first hire. You know, look at just look at his like hockey tree of all the people that have gone on to different jobs and run different teams, or the people that he's, you know, that are under his wing, no pun intended. You know, Jimmy Devellano is an extraordinary hockey man. And so when I got to DFN, I wanted to do the Ice Time show. I wanted to do a hockey show, you know, and I know that Lorna and Rich, they didn't realize how big of a sport hockey is. But when you have arguably the greatest player of all time in Gordie Howe, and arguably the greatest goaltender of all time in Terry Sawchuk, and now, although that wasn't the case in the beginning, perhaps the greatest defenseman of all time in Nick Lindstrom. I mean, this is an iconic franchise. It doesn't get better. No American team has won as many cups as the Red Wings. They have 4 or 5 guys who are 1,000-point scorers. If Sergei didn't leave, which I still think he regrets, you know, he would have been a 1,000-point scorer for them.
For like 10 years, I'm sorry, for like 10 years, they were like the Yankees of the NHL.
There's really no question. There's no question. I mean, they are, you know, you add up all their championships, it's more than the other 3 professional teams combined. You know, I mean, they are definitely a standard that really is professional sports-wise. It doesn't get much better than the Red Wings, record-wise, championship-wise, and iconic players that they have had. I don't think, you know, and the Tigers have had a slew of them too, and the Pistons have had many great players, and, you know, certainly the Lions have had their fair share too. I'm not going to, you know, Joe Schmidt invented the middle linebacking position essentially. You know, I mean, I know my Detroit history. Yeah, Bobby Lane, you know, I think we all are in agreement. Who wouldn't want to party with Bobby Lane? I mean, that sounds like that would have been a memorable time. We probably would have been arrested, for sure, but it would have been fun. Yeah. So I think that was it. You know, so when I got on the radio, and I also worked at WLLZ for a time, before DFN, and there was a guy, Andy Savage, who was a rock jock there, who got to know Darren McCarty really, really well. And so he got to know Darren, and I got to know Darren. He got to know Darren in his rookie year. And I can remember when because Darren was fighting all the time, and the jersey wasn't a tie down, and Darren's beating on to some guy, and the guy would rip off his jersey, and then Darren would go and sit in the box, and he would have Savage Radio on, a Andy Savage t-shirt. Savage Radio was black with yellow, Savage Radio. I can remember Scotty going up to me, and, you know, and I love Scotty Bowman. I mean, he treated me well. He did a lot for my career. always took me aside and would ask me questions, and he would bust my chops a little bit. I would play games with him. He's really into hockey cards. Every time I really wanted to ask Scotty something, I would ask him about hockey cards first, and then he'd go on. There was time that they were tall ones, and I go, Scotty, do you remember those tall hockey cards? And he'd go, oh, you mean the tall boys? And then he would light up, and I could ask him anything, but
that's so cool.
But my point being is that he would say, all right, he goes, and I have to clean this up, obviously. What the heck is Savage Radio? What is that? What is that? What is that? And I said, well, it's a radio show, I think Andy actually went to Darren's wedding back then in the day. So I got in right there. And then when a lot of these guys, Draper's first day as a Red Wing, Tim Taylor's first day as a Red Wing, all the draft picks, got to know the Russians really well. I was working for Michigan Hockey Magazine back then too, and I was writing feature stories. So I really got to know them. I got integrated with them. And I really feel, because I would do that show and then I would do the pre and post game show, my thing at WDFN always, and I would tell them this, I know we don't have the team's rights, and we're never probably going to get them. It's way too much money for who we're working for. But what we can do and what we should do and what our goal should be is we should be where they go before and after the game's the audience. We should be must listening.
Yeah. And you were.
And I think we did accomplish that, and I think, granted, the Lions post games and the Red Wing things, I stayed on all night when they won.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Just segue right into that, Art, because that is infamous in this town. When you went on all night after they won the cup.
There was a point, Darren McCarty, almost to a point of embarrassing me, always says Art wasn't a media guy. He was kind of part of our team. But I think he means that like I was like their little mascot kind of part. Hey guys, let's win, that kind of guy. I don't think I was that way. I always try to be true to being a reporter, but knowing in radio as a personality, I can blur the lines a little bit.
Yeah.
I came up with, for Christ's sakes, go out and play some hockey. And that was not said in affection.
Yeah.
I was pissed. They lost to St. Louis, a team they never should have in the playoffs. And, Terry Foster tells a pretty good story about that, because I was with Terry. We were doing the Sports Doctors when I went off the hook. But there were times during the playoffs, Scotty would have a clock, 30 minutes, and then and I think it was just to get Keith Gave all upset. And then would say, okay, time to go. Okay, media, time to go. And I don't know, I guess I'm happy and proud about this. I never had to leave.
Well, Greg Henson is referred to you as even though you were older than a lot of guys, they treated you like their little brother. Is that pretty good accurate?
I never had to go. I never had to go. Yeah, I was older than these guys. Brendan Shanahan, till this day, still thinks I'm his age. And I'm a little bit older than Brendan. Not much, but I still am. But. Another thing is that I've always had a really good relationship with Steve Yzerman, because I have enormous amounts of respect with him. I don't think that there is an athlete on the planet who has a higher tolerance for pain and playing through pain than Steve Yzerman.
I can't argue with that.
And so but with Steve, he comes at you, and you have to go right back at him. You know what I mean?
Give me an example. Art. Can you give me an example?
Well,
without telling too much, without speaking out of school too much.
One time, this was a time where I was saying something, because I was always hanging like Marty LaPointe, Drapes, Malpe, Darren. I like that kind of group of people. The sweet, and Steve always, he had a stall where Marty LaPointe sat next to him, but it was like two people. Okay. That was it. Then they had a change room, and then it was the locker room. So Steve was kind of, and then there was a big hallway that they would walk out to, their dressing room, and then the goalies were there. So Steve was kind of off.
Sure.
But it was a perch where he could see everything that was going on in the room.
He was the captain.
So he would just sit there and be quiet and just look. And whenever Steve spoke, trust me, they listened. And I was sitting there. I don't know what I was doing or what I was saying. going on with obviously it was Draper and Maltby and Marty and Darren. I was and I mean it could have been talking about 24. I mean, they were all into 24.
Great show.
And 24 went, and so guess what? I was into 24.
Yeah.
I would walk into the room after a 24 episode the next day. I wouldn't even ask hockey questions. Can you believe Jack Bauer shot that guy in the leg?
We used to have a drinking game every time Jack Bauer's. We'd have to drink every time Jack Bauer would say, "This is Jack. I need you to do something for me." We drink.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Little did we know that Chloe was from Detroit.
Right.
And so I mean, it was just and I would say all that kind of stuff. Well, he got up and he was walking into the trainer's room or something, and he comes up to me and says, if you really believe that, or if you have the guts, and I can't exactly remember specifically, he goes, why don't you go on the radio and say that? He goes, and you'll be my favorite media person of all time, Art. That's what Steve says to me. I go, Steve, I'm not already? And he goes, well, what do you mean? I go, well, haven't you been listening? And he goes, no, and he was hurt, so he wasn't playing at the time. Sure. I said, every day on the air, I try to mention you 2 or 3 times. Again, I have to clean it up. So people don't forget who the bleep you are. And obviously they're not going to forget him because he's Steve Yzerman, the captain of the team. And he looked at me and he said, you... And he turned around and then he just started laughing. I thought that was a pretty good line on my part really, really quickly, but you have to do that with him. Yeah. And, and I think over the years, I mean, I still get people when we do the Zooms and I'm asking him questions, he answers everything I ask him and I can joke with him and laugh with him. And, but that comes down to decades of knowing him, respecting him as a player and as a man and everything that he does. I mean, Steve Yzerman is a very, very measured, no nonsense, focused guy, but there's also a side to him that is completely, for lack of a better term, hilarious. And I think that all of that together, hopefully I'm answering your question right.
Oh, you are.
I go on about this. I feel very honored and very privileged that I'm as close to that team as I am, and I tell people, I know sometimes maybe you don't cross the line, you try not to, and I do try to keep the journalistic principles in check, and when I need to, I try to be,
You're a journalist, right?
Yeah, I try to be, but at times I've crossed the line a little bit with the Wings and you've Bob Uford it.
You've been Bob Uford for the Red Wings.
I think in a way, I really think as far as like my inspiration to be radio or what I did was Bob Uford for sure. And also those Jack Benny albums I talked about, which was a whole litany of radio in its golden era, when radio was, the standard form of entertainment in the United States.
Well, before we move on for Yzerman, if March 26, 1997 is 1A, as far as my favorite Red Wing memory during that run, 1B has to be I think it was a Game 7 overtime, Stevie Y from the blue line in overtime. That game to me is still embedded in my mind, and they had a lot of them.
Well, what's really cool about that one, and that I believe that was like the 96 Western Conference semifinal against the Blues.
Yeah.
Wayne Gretzky was on that team, and, it was just the start of the second or third. I think it went a couple of overtimes.
It was like the third overtime, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it was the third over, but it was early in the third. I can remember people were pensive because the Red Wings at that time, that's, Boston just eclipsed the mark that the Red Wings had set that year. So they were like far and away, I think they only lost like 14 regular season games that year, had 131 points, 162 games, when Steve goes over, I think he just goes over the blue line and fires that puck and beats John Casey, the goaltender, and erupts. Probably the happiest.
Yeah.
I don't know if he'd say this. Probably the happiest he's ever been. I mean,
he was playing injured that night, if I'm not mistaken, was he not?
Yeah, he was always hurt.
Yes.
I go back to my favorite line in all of sports is something Tyrone Wheatley said when he came back for his senior year at Michigan, because he was the odds-on favorite then to win the Heisman Trophy. He was considered to be like the best back in America at that point, but he got hurt in Michigan's training in August or something, and then he came back and he had a good year. He really did. He was an exceptional back, but I remember somebody saying to him, "Hey, Tyrone, are you 100%?" And, and he shakes his head and he looks down and he goes, "Man, I'm a football player. I'm never 100%. Right. Well, I kind of paraphrase that. Man, they're professional athletes. They're never 100%. They're never. The game is just too demanding mentally and physically. They're never there. I mean, they can say, I feel great today, but there's something underneath, and when Steve did that, and I think the best angle for that is the behind the net, what Casey faced. Yeah. You see Casey, you see Steve coming over, and then he shoots it, and that thing was high, hard. I mean, it was a bullet. It was a missile, and that to me encapsulates how talented he really, really was. Because John Casey was having a phenomenal playoff year for St. Louis then. He was no slouch. And for Steve to just say, you know what, it's time to end it. I mean, he probably says that every time he shoots.
Right.
But bam, and just the shot and the velocity, and to get the behind the Casey shoulder angle of it, I mean, it's spectacular. It's truly spectacular.
Before we move on from the fan and we move on to what you're doing now, because I want to talk a little bit about that before I wrap up, but I want to be conscious of your time. But let me ask you this. Why do you think WDFN, the fan, was so popular?
I think it was because we had a family environment. We started off together. We all, it was uncharted territory. Detroit did not have a sports talk radio station. Many of us were accomplished in various fields, and we were thrown in together. And instead of competing with one another or trying to be better, and today I'm not going to get into it, but I don't think there's that type of environment anymore. And I think we viewed each other as colleagues, but friends, and we're all in it together. So when we were done with our show and carried it over to the next, there was a feeling of a family environment, that here, you're at the sports doctors for Christmas, and now it's New Year's, and here you are with the Mega Man or Parker and the Man, or, the third shift, whomever, we all got along and we all worked towards each other. We weren't stabbing each other in the back. We weren't trying to show anybody up. We were an environment where we invited people into our shows, and people felt like they were part of something. And I think the reason they felt that there was part of something is because each personality, regardless of, whether you were an update reporter, whether everybody was incorporated. Hell, John Bloom, who I still love to this day, I kept saying, I made up, because I would make stuff up, okay? And I would say that John Bloom was a practicing nudist. And I wish he wouldn't practice when he was giving his updates. So Bloomer took off his shirt, and we took a picture from the waist up of him doing his report with the microphone where it looked like he was naked. To me, I mean, even people know he's not, but everyone was in on the joke. We were all in it together. Right. Yeah. It definitely theater of the mind. That's why I love radio. Radio's still my first love. I love radio above all else. And, but I think that's why it worked. Swindell's writing or Swindell's songs, or everybody pitched in and everybody got along. I mean, we had Friday nights at Dunleavy's, where we would sit there and just commiserate as friends and talk about different teams and what we thought. We'd share information. We weren't competing with one another, but we knew we were competing with an outside world that looked at us in the beginning not favorably, and we knew that if we didn't stick together, that it would never work to a certain degree, but we all really, really liked each other. We did a really good job. We had a lot of really, really good people. And, and also I would be remiss if I didn't mention one person, two people actually, about WDFN. First is Phil Lamka, who was the general manager of WDFN and W4, which was a very successful country station at the time. They were winning Country Station of the Year, major market for like 10, 11 years running. I think Barry Martitz was their program director, and he was PD of the year. I mean, so they had a really good thing. Phil Lamka decided to make WDFN 11:30 a.m. turn it into a sports
because it was CXI or something like that, if I'm not mistaken.
CXI, that's exactly right. It was country, and one of my good friends, Country Dan Dixon, worked there. One of the guys who, a good friend of mine, got to know him originally in Ann Arbor, Phil Lamka, and then somebody who's still, and I've always said this, I don't mean to be a downer here or anything, who still inspires me because of the courage that she showed and was a very, very dear friend of mine, is Sabrina Black. I always loved her voice. I can remember before we started working together, she was doing news and stuff, and I would always try, if our news person was out, if I was producing a show or my show, get her to be the substitute news.
She was great.
Or news reporter. And, and Sabrina, many times I would go over there, her husband, Steve Black, love him too. Go over there and hang with them, and, what she did and what she put through, and how she never, ever, ever, lost who she was. She was just, I get choked up thinking about it because Sabrina was the best. She was really, really, really the best. And, not a day goes by where I don't think about her and get inspired by who she was.
She was a true inspiration. And I'm speaking for myself and scores of others of my generation that became broadcasters because of Sabrina, because of Jennifer Hammond, because of you, because of Stoney and Wojo. That whole station created a movement of people getting into the broadcast industry, and I still believe that today. And you mentioned Sabrina. Someone who we didn't talk about was Greg Sugar Bear. He was one of the first guys there too. Another great, news person. The
Sugar Bear was our first news anchor. He was on the Morning Battery with Butch Arthur Stearns and Larry. Butch and Larry. The Morning Battery. They were. It was. But I think we all got along. You know what? And we were normal people. We weren't really egomaniacs. We weren't really into ourselves, I think, even when I would have lion meltdowns or be cheering the Red Wings or whatever we did was real. It was genuine, and people knew that. It wasn't contrived. It wasn't like I didn't sit down and say, I'm going to hate the Lions today, Terry, so you've got to like them so we can have inner conflict. We were just who we were and did our show. And I can say that for everybody that worked there. Parker and Mark Wilson. Everybody. Mega was Mega. Ike Griffin. Eric Pate and Sean Belegian. The third shift. Those guys were.
Damon the Dog, great. Another guy came through there.
Yeah, Damon the Dog Perry. I love Damon. Very, very, very unique talent. Very gifted.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
All right. Well. If people don't know, I don't think they'll be surprised. But you've been working with the Detroit Red Wings for the last several years. How did this opportunity come to be, and what do you do for the Red Wings now, Art?
Well, I was approached by the Red Wings. My good friend, dear friend Dana Wakiji, who also worked at WDFN. She was one of our news reporters. Her first shift ever on WDFN. She was doing the news for us, and Terry and I took her to was it Steve's Soul Food afterwards, give her a taste of Detroit. But Dana's been a long dear friend of mine, and she was working for the Red Wings along with Bill Roos, who was a longtime Free Press reporter, and then went over when websites and all that kind of stuff. Bill Roos was there. Under the beginning of the direction of Mike Bayoff, another great guy. Bill left the Red Wing organization, and Dana moved up a notch. And she said, hey, would you like this job? I think you could really do it. And I'm thinking where I'm at my career, radio has changed. There's more people unemployed in Detroit radio than are employed. I mean, it's really a shrunken market. There isn't essentially any real sports talk radio except for one station, no competition, no place to go. I know people have tried, so I was a little bit down on the industry, I'll be honest with you, or, I think it's lazy now.
Sure.
So anyway, so I started to interview for the Red Wings, and I was going to be like kind of Dana's backup reporter. And, cover the team, and when she couldn't travel, and, just be like an everyday beat reporter, but more of, writing maybe the feature story, or if she wanted to write the feature story, write the game notes, but we both covered the game together, and we went into all that. I did travel with the team more than I thought, but I also started to do a podcast, the Red and White Authority, which I actually had started with Kevin Allen. There were 20. I know when I say episode 196 or whatever, whatever we're on, we're going to have Dan Cleary on this week to talk Red Wing prospects. Actually, there were 25 of those beforehand with Kevin Allen, but I named it Red and White Authority. He liked the name. Kevin, I asked Kevin when I got the Red Wing thing, they wanted me to do a podcast. I want to call it the Red and White Authority. My bosses all liked it at the Red Wings. They liked that name. And Kevin said, yeah, sure, go ahead. Kevin's, because he's one of the best. And, said, yeah, that was your name, so go ahead. So I did that. But then I started to do crossover and do video work for them and all kinds of stuff. To put it in a nutshell, I do a variety of different things there now. I write stories. I'm up on the big screen and for Game Day Live in between periods, breaking down the game, or before the game. It's me, Daniela Bruce, another person I really, really, enjoy and love working with her. And then a Red Wing alum. When I first began and I was doing the forecheck, I was working with Carly Johnston. Carly, great in her own right. You know what I mean? So. Yeah. I had a hand in almost everything that's multimedia for the Red Wings at this point. I do, and I got along so well. But Ken Holland and I would do podcasts that were almost 2 hours long. I mean, and I can remember when Ken left. It doesn't get any better for me than his replacement being Steve Yzerman.
How great is that?
For me, because I know him. And I think if you notice when Steve does his Zooms or his pressers and all that, he starts off guarded as usual.
Right.
But the more he talks, he does say things and he's really good at it. But then I think a lot of people firing questions at him are, bozos like me who were firing questions at him when he was a player too. Sure. So he has a rapport with this Detroit media. And I think that, and I don't know if Steve would ever admit this, because he's really, like I said, he's a very, very smart man. He knows what he's doing. But I think that maybe after it's over, he'd say, like, I probably shouldn't have said all that, But he gets comfortable because he knows us so well. We're all familiar with each other. So, that's really what I do. I'm doing podcasts. I'm working on some... I don't want to give it away because we're still competitive, but I'm working on a series of features that I think people are really, really going to enjoy. And I really do want to get involved with Mike Bayoff and what he does with the Alumni Association and those guys, because I know all those guys too. And the Red Wing Alumni Association is a wonderful organization. And, they do a lot of charitable work along with the Illich Foundation, certainly. It kind of goes hand in hand. And, I'm getting at an age now, Ron, where, it's, what do you do? Give back,
right.
Be more community minded, more, helping people out, I guess, is the best way to put it.
Yeah, I thought never in a million years I'd be in politics. I'm on the Utica City Council now. It blows my mind. But I got to get back.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Art, before I let you go, one final question. You kind of touched on a little bit ago, but I know that you're a radio fan like I am, first and foremost, because we grew up with that theater of the mind aspect. In your opinion, what is the state of radio today, and how can it be improved?
I don't know what the state of radio is today, but I don't think it's a good state. I'm not going to be Dr. Doom and Gloom here, but I will say this. I think that because of all the avenues of social media and where people can go now, I think radio is pretty much, unless you're listening to a game at home, but you can probably watch it on television, is for the car. But then there's satellite radio. I don't have satellite radio, but I got in a car accident going down to the Walleye Fan Appreciation Day on 75. Hit a big giant rubber thing that was coming at me, a tire that had shredded. And so now I have a rental car, which is a huge 1,500 Ram truck. I've never driven a truck before that has satellite radio.
Okay.
And so, I've got to admit, I have like the Beatles channel, and I have the NHL Network channel. I have deep tracks, which are old tracks from artists, and then like 60s gold or something,
right.
And then so I can see where that would be very, very enticing.
Yeah.
But I do think when radio was deregulated and they made it MIC radio, where local content, local affiliations, I think radio changed for the worse, and it eliminated a lot of jobs, and local radio pretty much died. And, I know people are trying their best right now that still have jobs in radio and all that kind of stuff, but I just don't know if radio, which I would consider to be a bit of long-form content.
Yeah.
I'm not sure long-form content plays well with whatever generation we're on now, or people that are now ascending into the power ranks. I don't think they look at long-form content and appreciate it because they think it's long and it's boring and I don't have the time. I got to, put a picture of what I'm eating for dinner on, because I know that the world is waiting for that.
Right.
And, I really think so. I don't think radio's in a good place. I know that Jacobs and, other people, are trying, and people are trying, but I'm not so sure that as we get older, that the people that are taking over and running radio are even broadcasters anymore.
Right.
Their bottom line, what's our, I'm going to eliminate all these jobs. I mean, I knew we were in trouble when we had people that weren't in Detroit, weren't in the corner office, the bosses signing your checks, where, depending on whomever you own, wherever their world headquarters was based, which was not Detroit, would say, okay, we're going to eliminate 35 jobs in Detroit. They don't know the Detroit market. They don't care about these people. They don't know who they are. They don't know if they're good or bad or whatever.
Right.
They just know we got to slash our bottom line. Goodbye, you're gone. That to me is wrong. It's just wrong. And I think that, very few people, it's just not like it was, and I'm not sitting there saying, let's go back to, tin can and tin can. Hello, this is the telephone. I'm not saying
right. stuff
stuff like that. But what I'm saying is that it was a medium that served a purpose. All radio stations, their license is, radio stations are supposed to serve the people where their license originates from, which would be Detroit, Michigan. The wants and needs of your community. It's a community medium, and it's no longer that. It's a syndicated medium, and it's I think it's terrible. I really do.
Art, I want to thank you for coming on and sharing your broadcast story, sir. I very, very much appreciate it. You're the best.
Well, thank you, Ron. Hopefully I didn't talk your ear off. I mean, if this timer's right, I've almost gone for an hour and a half, so I apologize for that. I don't know, but
Dennis Frawley still got you beat. I think that podcast went 2.5 hours.
Oh wow! I love Dennis too. I mean, yeah, it's Detroit's a great town. I've always thought Detroit, media-wise, can stand up against anybody. I think there's a lot of national talent broke in Detroit, started in Detroit, or our native Detroiters. Look at our buddy Ryan Field doing so well as a sports anchor for Fox in New York City. Real talented, good kid. So it's a rewarding field. And if I've said it once, I've said it twice. I probably said it many times already. What I do beats working for a living.
Thank you, Art. Thank you again to Art Regner, and thank you for checking out Radio Dayz the Podcast. Today's show was brought to you by Team 71 Mortgage Group. Are you looking to buy or refinance your home and have questions that need answers now? Call Brian Allure, 810-444-6466. Today's show is produced by Ron Robinson Studios. If you need professional marketing videos, photography, headshots, maybe you need drone video from a licensed drone pilot, head over to ronrobinsonstudios.com, where you can also hear previous episodes of this podcast there as well. Also, if you'd like to learn more about the upcoming documentary movie and series about the history of radio, Art Regner's in it as well. Radio Dayz 101 Years of Radio. Click on the Radio Dayz the Movie under the documentaries tab at ronrobinsonstudios.com. Thanks for checking out the show. Hope you enjoyed it. Until next time.
You can't go! All the plants are gonna die!